Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Welcome to the February 27, 2020 Delta Stewardship Council meeting. Let's establish a quorum, starting with Ken Weinberg on my right.
Weinberg here.
Otto here. Damrow here.
Moranian here.
Tatayan here.
Villegas here.
And we have a quorum. We have canceled closed session, so we will not be having closed session. So let's go straight to the meeting summary. Do I have a motion on the meeting summary?
Move approval.
Seconded.
Okay, moved by Councilmember Moranian, seconded by Councilmember Gatto. Let's go with a vote.
Weinberg, aye.
Otto aye. Damrow aye.
Moranian, aye.
Tatayan, aye.
Villegas, aye.
And council summary meeting minutes are approved. For the chair's report, I just want to highlight that Monday, March 2nd, we'll be having a Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee meeting, and a major focus of that meeting will be ecosystem-based management. Dr. Jeff Mount will be giving a very short presentation on what ecosystem-based management means, the attributes of ecosystem-based management, and possibly some case studies. And then the DPIC members will be discussing various programs and projects that they have that contribute to ecosystem-based management. And then we'll also be discussing the potential barriers or existing barriers to ecosystem-based management. And out of that, we hope to get going on a compendium of these projects and programs that move us forward on ecosystem-based management. The meeting will also include an item on the urgency of controlling aquatic weeds, invasive aquatic weeds in the Delta, an item on the Social Science Task Force update on its final report. And John, am I missing something? Isn't there? And I think that's about it. So please join us if you can. March 2nd. It will not be video live stream, but there will be audio live stream available. And that is it for my chair's report. On to agenda item 7, executive officers. Oh, that's right, Ken. I don't know if he was able to load it.
I guess.
Okay.
I guess they are. You know what? Let's move past this.
Okay. Okay. Ready.
Good morning. First, I'll provide an update on the Council's Delta Levy investment strategy rulemaking process. When the legislature asked the Council to develop a strategy to guide Delta Levy investments, no one assumed that was going to be a straightforward task. In fact, it was a task given to the Council because it had proved to be so difficult and, frankly, unpopular. The Council and staff have been diligently working with our partners to develop this Delta Levy investment strategy over the past several years that we refer to as DLIS. And we've checked off some significant milestones along the way. As part of developing the DLIS, staff, supported by a consultant, developed a decision support tool, of which you're all familiar with by now, which was designed to identify flood risks to state interests on Delta Islands and tracts that are protected by levees. The tool was developed between 2014 and 2016 and was used to create risk maps that helped inform the Council's decision in 2018 to update the Delta Plan and its regulatory policy, RRP1. The risk maps produced by this decision support tool are based on Delta levee and island floor elevation data from 2007, which until recently was the best available information. However, we learned that in 2019, the Department of Water Resources released updated elevation imaging of the Delta and Sassoon Marsh using a technology called LIDAR, or light detection and ranging. This new information is significant enough that at the March council meeting, staff are going to be recommending to you that you formally withdraw the rulemaking in order to update the D-List decision support tool. We would then evaluate the tool with the new elevation data that we're now in receipt of to determine if further changes are needed and report back to the council. We'll have additional information for you at our next meeting in March with proposed milestones describing the work that needs to be accomplished, along with a plan for stakeholder and public participation going forward. Are there any questions about that? So we'll have probably an action before the council in March where we will have additional information. And in the meantime, we're continuing to engage with both our MOU partners, the Department of Water Resources and the Flood Board, as well as the local RDs and many interested parties in Delta levees. The council sent 2 comment letters this month, and those are both in your binder. On February 14th, the council sent a letter to the Department of Water Resources regarding their draft EIR on the Lookout Slough Tidal Habitat Restoration and Flood Improvement Project. The project includes enhanced fish and wildlife habitat and improved flood control, and consists of restoration activities on over 3,000 acres in unincorporated Solano County and a small portion in Yolo County. Council staff has previously met with the department to discuss this project, and we've submitted a previous comment letter on their NOP in April 2019. The council also submitted a comment letter to the Metropolitan Transportation Commission regarding its Plan Bay Area 2050, which is a regional transportation plan and sustainable community strategy for the San Francisco Bay Area. The letter states that as portions of the region covered by the plan are located in the Delta, the Reform Act requires that the Commission provide the Council a draft of the plan 60 days before adoption. The Council then has the opportunity to consider if the plan and the strategy are consistent with the Delta plan. The Commission currently is really at an early stage of their planning process, so it's a good time for us to get engaged. We just closed out an appeals period for a covered action. On January 24th, the Contra Costa County Flood Control and Water Conservation District submitted a certification of consistency for their Three Creeks Parkway Restoration Project. They asserted that the proposed project was consistent with the Delta Plan. Specifically, they found that it was consistent with 6 of our regulations, and the remaining 11 were not applicable to that particular project. The project is a component of a larger restoration program called Lower Marsh Creek that the district also certified late last year with the Delta Plan. It's a multi-benefit flood control and creek restoration effort that's going to be implemented both by the district and the nonprofit American Rivers. The public review and appeals period for the project was open from January 24th through this past Monday, February 24th, and no appeals were received. We have 3 new council employees to announce. Julia Schmitz joins us as an office technician in our business services unit. She's our first point of contact for visitors to the council. She comes from CAL FIRE in Fresno, so she's new to Sacramento. The next time you're on the 15th floor, be sure to say hello to Julia. Anna Abaleda will be assisting with contracts as the council approaches our fiscal year end. She worked for the State Lands Commission for 24 years as a contract analyst, and we're happy to have her on board as a retired annuitant for extra help when we really need it most. And finally, Molly Williams joins the Planning Division as their new 2020 Sea Grant Fellow, and she's going to be assisting with both the Ecosystem Amendment and our Climate Vulnerability Assessment. She joins the council after completing her Master's in Environmental Science from UC Santa Barbara. As I mentioned at the last meeting, Susan, Councilmember Fiorini, and I, as well as members of the Delta Independent Science Board, the USGS, have been engaged in a multi-month recruitment and interview process for the position of the Delta lead scientist. John plans to return to USF this summer, and we've identified 4 qualified candidates that we're in the process of evaluating. Given the nature of the lead scientist position, the interview process is structured in a way that allows public participation. So each candidate delivers a brown bag presentation that summarizes their expertise and how it relates to the work of the council, and this is open to the public. After each presentation, there is an open Q&A session where we invite stakeholders to interact with the candidate. And in January, we had our first one of these, a day-long interview with candidate and current Independent Science Board member, Dr. Jay Lund. And 3 more candidates have now been publicly announced, and their scheduled brown bags and interview dates, and they are as follows. Dr. Denise Reed will be interviewed on March 9th, Dr. Lisa Marie Wyndham-Myers on March 12th, and Dr. Laurel Larson on March 30th. All brown bags are scheduled to begin here at Park Tower at 10:45 a.m., and the Q&A sessions follow from noon until approximately 1 o'clock. And all of this information is available on the Delta Council website under the Delta Independent Science Board meetings section. We've moved to tab 7 in your binder. The outreach highlights report and active projects lists are available for this month, or for the past month, really. Staff have now included highlighting on the active projects list to reflect changes since the last council meeting, which was a request of Councilmember Weinberg. If you have any questions, let us know. There was also a request for changes to the budgeting report, which we produce quarterly, and so you'll see those changes in the report at our April meeting. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bethany Payne to introduce her extern to provide the legal update. Ken has a question.
Yeah, can we...
Councilmember Weinberg.
Just on part of your report, Jessica. So I want to thank you for that report on all the pending covered actions. That's really helpful. I also think it gives a sense to the outside world of how much we're going, what's going on, how much a big part of our core work and our mission this is. It's helpful to know what's kind of new on the chart, so we could see, nothing's ever stagnant, and typically it doesn't get smaller, it gets bigger. So that's helpful. One thing I wasn't sure of is if it is highlighted as, new since the January report, is it new or is it a change of status? So one of the things I was hoping is that, let's see what didn't show up, what's kind of additive to the covered actions versus, the status changed.
I've got our planning deputy here, Jeff Henderson, who can address that question.
Yes, Jeff, please address that.
Thank you. Good morning. The list, as it's comprised right now with the highlights that we've added, we're identifying both changes in status as well as new projects. So a new project would appear as a full highlighted row in the table, whereas a change in status would be a mix of the original with the change.
Oh, okay. So anything we see in that report that's highlighted,
if it's a whole
means
row
that's
highlighted,
just like added. So that's okay. So that, it just tells you from, I don't know, even though a year or so ago, how much more active this whole area is. Wow, that's great. Thank you. No, really appreciate the report, and I think it's very helpful for the outside world to understand it. I did have another question, Jessica, on your report, because I think we talked about this at the last meeting, the selection process for the lead scientist. The lead scientist reports to the council or to...
Correct.
Yeah. That was my understanding. So you've got 4 candidates. What's the process look like? I remember with John, does that just come back to the council for the final approval, or,
The hiring committee serves to inform recommendations to the Independent Science Board. The way that the Reform Act is written is then the Independent Science Board makes a final recommendation back to the council for the council to give an up-down vote. Additionally, traditionally, the U.S. Geological Survey has funded the position, which is unique, but allows kind of an arm's length arrangement. And so they have a role in the hiring committee as well.
Okay. So I would imagine that we have the ability to go into closed session on personnel issues. And I don't recall this in when John came on, but it may be good for the council to have an opportunity to talk to the selected individual just to ask our questions. You know, I know you said we could come to the brown bag lunch, but I think, you know, given that we're making a personnel decision in here, it seems more appropriate to allow us that opportunity in closed session. If there's questions we want to ask the selected applicant, that seemed, my experience, that's pretty standard procedure for making these kind of appointments, though recognizing the arm's length distance and the recommendation coming from the ISB, but we are being asked to take action on that, and I don't know what other feelings are on this.
Yeah, I agree. I hadn't thought about it, but I think that my colleagues' comments make good sense. I think it would be appropriate for, you know, maybe for us to get the top couple recommendations and maybe discuss them in closed session briefly. Make sure that we thoroughly vet and do our job as oversight as well. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think at some point it would be good for us to, since we're going to work with this, you know, body and this person, it will be a good idea to, you know, ask our questions and make sure that we having in place all the protocols and everything else that you just mentioned, but to have input.
Okay, how many lead scientists have we had?
We've had
3.
depends how you count. So Cliff served twice. Cliff was the original lead scientist at the transition between the CalFed program and the council. And then Peter Goodwin was the next lead scientist. Then Cliff came back for a short term, and then my position.
Okay.
And I think, from what I know, that the search process has evolved, and I think the current process, when I was appointed, it was a very similar process where there was council involvement, independent science board involvement, and USGS involvement, since all 3 of those groups have a significant stake and input in terms of the position.
Mm-hmm. So
Yeah.
what is the sequencing? I
Well,
mean, so in the past, it was the chair and vice chair that sat in with the ISB members as the candidate pool was narrowed. But I'm not remembering, Jessica, after the...
Yeah, I think eventually that was a discussion that was brought to closed session. I mean, I would have to defer to our chief counsel and maybe her memory, but...
Well, so the ISB is a separate board, and they have this committee that has been noticing closed session to go in for their personnel conversations and interviews. So they've been doing that. Closed session is certainly a possibility for the council as a separate board to consider for personnel. The issue would be, as you've addressed, timing and sequencing of when you do that, or if you do that. But it is a possibility.
Okay.
Yeah, actually getting the candidates here, though, for a closed session would be challenging. In fact, scheduling the interviews has proven very challenging. As you might imagine, these are candidates of international stature. In fact, one I think is currently residing in Finland on sabbatical, and another is on sabbatical in France. So I think we'd have to look into the logistics of having a candidate present physically on an additional date. But there's nothing to stop the council from having closed session discussions with your representatives from the hiring committee to share information.
Okay, well then, but we're on a deadline. Your term, John, is up by when?
My term ends July. At the end of July, I go back to USF in August.
And then backtracking from July, in order to do the contract with USGS, it takes how long?
Well, so I can just say from experience, my appointment was at a similar time scale. I think I was notified in the spring, in the the final decision from the council, and then actually and USGS was in the spring.
Mm-hmm. Well, why don't we work on getting to a closed session where all council members. John,
We do this telephonically. I mean, you got someone in Finland and someone in France. They're not going to come over here just for us to chat with them.
Yeah. Good point.
Let's have at least 2 telephonic discussions. I think that would be sufficient.
Okay.
So that eliminates the need to travel.
And I'd ask for your permission to go back to the hiring committee and the ISB and the candidates and figure out some options, and then bring those back.
And I would say, rest assured, the 4 candidates are outstanding. All 4 of them are really good.
I guess the reason I brought it up is the council is the appointing authority. And this is one of, I guess, 2 personnel decisions we have. So it just seems to be good practice to have some involvement, whether it's to our ability to talk to do our due diligence with the hiring committee, and just have some more formalized process here for our involvement, so that our approval has some foundation to it.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we'll wait for your options.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. On to our legal update.
Thank you, members. I'd like to invite Dan Cacciatore up. He's our legal extern for the semester from McGeorge. You may remember him from last month's meeting where he gave an excellent presentation. I appreciate his hustle this month on a last-minute piece of litigation that will be of interest to you on the biological opinions.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Tatayan and council members. Today I'm here to update the council on a litigation matter filed last week by the state of California against the federal government in the Northern District of California. On February 19th of 2020, the administration issued its final record decision on the long-term operation of the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project, adopting the 2019 federal biological opinions. On February 20th of 2020, the state of California filed its lawsuit challenging the actions of the National Marine Fisheries Services, the Bureau of Reclamation, and the United States Fish and Wildlife Services. The complaint alleges that those federal agencies, which prepared those federal biological opinions and therefore verified and justified the increased water diversions from the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta to Central California, violated the Administrative Procedure Act and violated the National Environmental Policy Act by failing to provide the public with a meaningful opportunity to comment on the proposed actions and potential impacts resulting from the biological opinions. More specifically, the complaint alleges that the biological opinions violated the Endangered Species Act by failing to provide potential impacts on endangered species such as the Chinook salmon, the Central Valley steelhead, and the Delta smelt. The complaint also alleges that the agencies failed to consider the scientific evidence presented before them. The complaint requests that the court enter an order setting aside the biological opinions and preventing any further federal action until further environmental analysis is completed. In a second litigation matter, a coalition of fishing and environmental groups...
Who's
Yes,
the
sir.
judge?
So there's not been a judge assigned to that matter, and I checked this morning to double check that. The lawsuit was filed on the 20th, so we're still waiting for the judge to be assigned to that case. On the second litigation matter, a coalition of fishing and environmental groups have filed a similar lawsuit against the federal administration in December in the Northern District of California, also challenging the validity of the biological opinions. In that case, 2 Central Valley water agencies, the San Luis and Delta Mendota Water Authority and the Westlands Water District, were permitted to join to defend the federal biological opinions, and they requested that the matter be transferred to the Eastern District Court in Fresno. In that case, U.S. Magistrate Laurel Beeler will hear arguments on that motion on March 26th. Thank you for your time and consideration. I'll now take any questions that you may have.
Any questions, council members?
No, good update.
Yeah, that's it.
More lawsuits.
Thank you.
Excellent update.
Well done.
Okay. Next, I'll invite up Ryan Stambrough for our legislative update. Welcome back, Ryan. And council members, the legislative report should be in your purple folder, as it is a freshly printed item.
Yes, thank you for that reminder, Jessica. Good morning, council members. Nice to be back before you. Last Friday marked the bill introduction deadline for the second year of the legislative session. And with that, the introduction of new measures pertaining to council interests. So with your indulgence, I'll jump right in. AB 2518 by Assemblymember Jim Wood from Santa Rosa. seeks to encourage voluntary restoration on private lands by exempting landowners from specific civil liabilities. 2518 appears to build upon the safe harbor agreement concept that some of you may be familiar with, which shields landowners who voluntarily manage habitat on their lands for special status species from regulatory liability if the species is accidentally taken as part of normal farming practices. As the Council is aware, a resilient ecosystem will ultimately require a mix of public and private restoration opportunities, which this bill could ultimately incentivize. Senator Portantino's SB 996 directs the State Water Board to develop a research program focused on constituents of emerging concern, which are chemicals being found in the water supply at increasing concentrations and include things like pharmaceuticals and personal care products. In its 2018 review of water quality science in the Delta, the Independent Science Board noted the significant uncertainty regarding the effects of nutrients and these emerging contaminants on the Delta ecosystem. To that end, as part of its review, the Delta ISB stated that constituents of emerging concern require greater vigilance and recommended improved coordination between public agencies to protect both ecosystem health and drinking water safety. SB 1101 by Senator Ana Caballero from Salinas would require DWR to convene a Water and Climate Science Advisory Board and to consult with the board when making decisions pertaining to the impacts of climate change on water resources. As you can see from the bill language in your folder, SB 1101 is still in its infancy with a number of details yet to be determined. And then the last three bills of note come by way of Senator Henry Stern from Malibu and focus on improving the state's planning in the face of climate change. SB 1188 would partially redirect the focus of the water plan towards strategies for increasing regional water resilience, a key focus of the Delta Plan and the water resilience portfolio put forward by the administration. SB 1258 would establish the Climate Catalyst Revolving Fund. And as you may recall from my January presentation, this is a pillar of the governor's climate change budget for the upcoming fiscal year. And then finally, Senator Stern's SB 1320 would establish a requirement for a California climate change assessment with an aim to compile sector-specific climate change-related liabilities to ultimately inform legislative action. Now, each bill I discussed this morning will be eligible to be heard in their first policy committees beginning in March, and I will certainly keep the council apprised of updates as things develop. And Madam Chair, with that concludes my report.
Thank you, Ryan. Any questions for Ryan? No questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Okay, moving on to item C. This item is to request authority to amend an existing contract with the Department of Water Resources for a scope change and to increase the total cost of the agreement from $495,000 to $711,000. This is also under tab 7 in your binder. As do many of the departments that are within the Resources Agency, the Council also has an interagency agreement with DWR for specialized assistance with IT services. Under the current agreement, the DWR Data Center provides network infrastructure, server maintenance, and storage so that the Council doesn't have to duplicate these services on site. The additional funding and scope change will add services for the continued remediation of council documents and our website to ensure accessibility and compliance with new state law, and for overall improvements to our website and for the planning, configuration, and deployment of online collaboration software. This requires council authorization because the amendment raises the total cost above my delegated signature authority. And with that, I'll entertain questions or motion.
Ken?
Move the staff recommendation.
Okay. Move to approve the staff recommendation by Councilmember Weinberg, seconded by Councilmember Gatto. Let's take the vote.
Weinberg, aye.
Darren Pillai.
Maranian, aye.
Tatai and I.
Villegas, aye.
Villegas, aye.
We should just check to make sure there wasn't any public comment on the item.
Oh, okay. Was there any public comment on this item?
Okay, thank you so much. And just to preview what's up ahead on the agenda, we have a review of the public draft of the Council's public participation plan, as well as an update from the Department of Water Resources and the Delta Conveyance Design and Construction Authority, and that's going to be item 10 on our agenda. And with that, I conclude my Executive Officer's report.
Thank you very much, Jessica. On to agenda item 8, Lead Scientist Report. Dr. John.
Great. Thank you, Chair Tatayan, and good morning, everyone. I have a few items to highlight for you before getting into the materials that are in the written summary. So first, I wanted to let you know that just earlier this month, Secretary Wade Crowfoot announced that there is the California Natural Resources Agency Partnership for Scientific Literature Access, an effort to provide much better access to journal articles and other scientific materials across the entire resources agency. This is something that within the Council and the Science Program has been of interest for many years. Actually, when I started 2.5 years ago, one of the first things staff members said was, how are we going to improve access to journal articles and how can we do that? And staff here thought about that, how we could do that internally, and then fortunately this was an issue for many other agencies, and the Natural Resources Agency took the lead on this. So we've now signed an agreement where we have access to over 100,000 journals across all of the agencies, and just much better overall access that will really allow us to keep up to date with current scientific research and publication. So I want to thank Eva Bush, who in the science program led this effort actually for a number of years to improve access. So I think it's really a major advancement for us and for all the other agencies. Second, I want to let you know that in addition to the search for the lead scientist position, we also are in the midst of the search for members of the Independent Science Board. So recall that 6 of the Independent Science Board members will be terming out one will term out in May, and 5 will term out in August of this year of 2020. And so we've been doing an extensive search. We had over 40 applicants for those 6 openings. Over the last month and a half, we've been doing interviews with a large number of candidates and speaking with references, and we have some outstanding applicants. We're getting very close. We'll be meeting shortly in the next week or so to review the final applications and to come to you with a recommendation in March for 6 new members of the Independent Science Board, and I think they are really some outstanding candidates. It'll be a slightly different pool of expertise than we currently have, but I think it will be a really a great mix. So that will be on the agenda assuming that we continue to move forward with the process as we are now going. We're planning to bring that to you in March, and I probably will update you before that so that you have some familiarity with the candidates before the March meeting. 2 other items that, in addition to the state fellows who serve here in the council and a program with Sea Grant where we work with recent graduates to get experience and to provide a lot of benefits for us. Kate Mellinson is one of the Sea Grant fellows that you have interacted with. We also support the Science Fellows program, the Delta Science Fellows program, that supports students and postdocs to do research in the Delta. So they stay at their home university institution, but they do work in the Delta. And so we have just recently that applications for that closed. We had 17 applications for student and postdoc fellows, and later this month, or in March, we'll be meeting to review those. So probably in March or April, we'll have a final decision, and I'll let you know who will be funding for that fellows program. And I would say it's probably one of the most significant programs, even though it's not in dollar amount, it's large, but it's not our largest effort, but it really is a great program in terms of providing opportunities for new scientists, mentoring for new scientists. So I think it's really valuable. I also will note that the state water contractors in the past have supported fellows out of that program as well, and are interested this year as well to partner on that. And then questions? And then one other item, the Social Science Task Force was mentioned, and you'll be getting updated on their final report. You got an update on their draft report, I think last month or the month before. But one of the recommendations out of that is to grow the capacity for social science within the Delta system. And so as part of that, we are working with California Sea Grant, and we have an extension specialist position for a social scientist that would be a joint position with the University of California and with the council. It's sort of like an entry-level faculty position, an adjunct faculty position, so a relatively recent PhD that we'll be looking for, and that position is out now and available. So we're looking widely to try to get some really high-quality applications for someone who will really help to lead the social science effort and implement many of the recommendations out of the task force. So I wanted to highlight those 4 items before moving into the materials that's in your binders. Any questions on any of those?
Madam Chair.
Oscar.
Yeah, thank you, John, for the social science position that you're interviewing for. Is it possible, and we don't need an answer today, but is it possible as that evolves and the position becomes filled, the framework for the work to be done in the social science work related to the work plans here, that they can become either a standing item or an occasional update to this body? Because I think it's an important component of the broader responsibilities. And I think as it starts new, it'd be good to hear kind of what the work plan looks like and what efforts are underway that might relate to the work that we're doing.
Certainly we can. I mean, I think there's definitely more and more interest and acknowledgement of the value of the social sciences. So I think it would be important to keep you up to date.
Great, thank you.
And you'll get to hear even more at the DPIC meeting on Monday from one of the authors.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so then I'll move into the article that I included in the summary. The title of that is Review and Recommendations for Monitoring Contaminants and Their Effects in the San Francisco Bay Delta. And this is a synthesis paper that came out of our 2017 symposium that the science program and the UC Davis Coastal and Marine Science Institute supported on contaminant issues. And actually it relates to one of the bills that Ryan mentioned in terms of looking at contaminants or constituents of emerging concern. So as Ryan highlighted, these could be pharmaceuticals, they could be personal care products. It could be more traditional contaminants that we think of like pesticides or heavy metals, any kind of contaminant or pollutant that has negative effects on the organisms and the ecosystem. Traditionally, the evaluation of contaminants has focused on lethal effects, exposing organisms to individual contaminants and seeing how high of a concentration they can withstand before they die. The newer approaches, the approaches that really are focused on here, look at sublethal effects on growth rates, on reproductive rates, or other health conditions of organisms within the ecosystem. And so this paper is really highlighting some of the new opportunities, some of the new tools and approaches that are being used to evaluate contaminants and how they might be incorporated into the work within the Delta. So some of the things that they're highlighting, as I mentioned, the historic focus has been on single contaminants. They highlight that we really should be looking at a mix of contaminants. And if you look at the visual abstract that's in your binder, I think it's on the right side of your binder. Or in the purple folder, I'm sorry. On the right side of the purple folder is a visual abstract showing that contaminants don't act alone. They may be affected by other contaminants, or they may be affected by stressors within the ecosystem. By stressors, we mean things like higher water temperature or salinity effects or pathogens, anything else that may have a negative effect on organisms. And contaminants, so what we really want to know is not just what the concentrations of contaminants are in the ecosystem, but what the effects are on organisms. And so that's what they really highlight, is focus on effects on organisms. They highlight on using new tools to evaluate those effects. So rather than looking at lethal effects on targeted organisms, use new techniques that are looking at growing cell cultures and looking at effects of contaminants on cell metabolism, on genetic effects and other things, and actually those newer techniques can be used much more rapidly because you're looking at smaller scale cellular effects rather than looking at lethal effects. And so they can be done more rapidly and in large numbers, using those as screening tools to evaluate potential contaminants that may be of concern, and then, if necessary, go into the more detailed evaluation using some of the more traditional approaches. So using some of those new tools, considering the mix of contaminants. They also, as I mentioned, focus on using sublethal effects, looking at not just what's going to kill an organism, but what might have a negative effect on an organism, especially on organisms, targeted organisms of concern, like delta smelt or other species. They highlight that we should use a weight of evidence approach. So collect evidence using a mix of these different tools and approaches. One thing that they highlight is that we might be able to look at how contaminants affect the biodiversity of a community. Traditionally, that's been a challenge to measure because you have to go out and do large-scale surveys. Using new techniques like environmental DNA, you might be able to get a much better handle on the diversity of a community. Environmental DNA is actually the focus of one of the recent symposia that I'll mention, where you collect a water sample and look at the DNA in the water sample to get an idea of the organisms that are within that community. And then use new data tools. All of these kinds of approaches, whether it's eDNA or the genetic or metabolic approaches to evaluating effects of contaminants, are going to generate lots and lots of data. So use the new sort of data tools that are being developed with bioinformatics and other approaches, using large data sets to use that weight of evidence and identify where there are issues of concerns. So actually, one term they use in the article that I never saw before and had to look was they talk about in silico approaches. And they're talking about computer approaches, silicon being the computer chip, so in silico approaching being computer-based approaches, large-scale data sets or modeling approaches as a way to evaluate things. So they acknowledge that these are all relatively new techniques, and they're not saying that these are things that we should adopt immediately, but that we should really continue to develop them, and that they're tools that we should be aware of and be thinking about how we could incorporate them into regulatory approaches and other highlighting red flags of areas where there are high levels of contaminants and focusing on those effects on organisms that we're really interested in. Mm-hmm. So with that, any questions on the article? Ken?
Just a question.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
It is. So it's an interesting article. It's 24 pages of text with about 20 pages of citation. So it's actually, I've never seen a paper that's so well cited, but it is packed with information.
So the key thing sounds like, less reliance on toxicity testing and a more holistic view of effects and cumulative effects of
multiple
transformational effects of kind of contaminants and other contaminants turning into something totally different, that kind of thing also, or?
Yes. So I think not moving away from toxicity, but moving away from lethal toxicity to sublethal effects and looking at smaller scale impacts that may have cumulatively could lead to significant impacts on the organism.
So, applying this in the Delta, is that sort of get to a regional board setting, TMDLs for certain things? Is that where this goes?
So I think that they acknowledge there definitely is a challenge in taking this sort of multi-contaminant approach and turning it into regulation. So they don't offer immediate solutions, but they do highlight the value of these new techniques to identify challenging situations more quickly than the traditional techniques, and they highlight the importance of connecting between scientists and regulators to think about how down the road these could be incorporated into regulation.
Because it brings up sort of the issue of okay, you've got whether these are constituents of emergency concern or you've got these cumulative effects. It's sort of, well, what do you do in the Delta about it? Is it a watershed protection approach? I mean, I kind of, coming from a water utility and protecting the public health, I kind of look at it, well, I know that can have a water treatment impact in getting them out, but how do you, what's the approach within the Delta of dealing with these types of contaminants?
So I think it's at an earlier stage than identify. I think what they're trying to say is use these tools to identify where the problems are, and then we can, then with that information, we'll be much better informed to start to identify, is there a treatment approach? Is there a pollution reduction approach? Where might we be more effective?
Yeah, it's a huge issue.
It is, yeah, certainly a challenge.
No, thank you. It was an interesting report.
Oscar, did you have a?
Yeah, just to follow up, John, this just blew right by me for the most part, but what I did hear,
Sorry to hear that.
No, that's okay. No, that's okay. But what I did hear you say is that it's not ripe quite for a recommendation in terms of how to adopt the work that's evolving here and what's you're considered discussing as the cumulative effects. But is there something that we ought to be monitoring so that when the time is ripe to adopt something that embeds into the work that we're doing, once again, that it's thoughtful and brought forward? Or is this something we're going to be tracking, or that
I think the message is we need to be putting resources into continuing to develop these tools so that they can inform us down the road in a way that will be more useful for regulation. That they offer a lot of promise. But right now they're not exploratory tools in any sense. I mean, they've been used for over a decade, many of these techniques, but putting together all of these different approaches, whether it's the testing methods, the weight of evidence, the large-scale data analysis, putting all those together is really valuable.
Okay. I just wanted to follow up just to say that I think it's critically important as it's a lot of the decisions that this body is making and will be making in the next couple of years are going to come and go despite what evidence and what data might be surfacing as a result of the work of these tools and the refinement of these tools. So it would seem to me we'd want to prioritize at some level a checkpoint, maybe in the near future, to see are we any further along in getting consensus around what tools we ought to be adopting or embedding as part of our policy-making or decision-making process. Because the work will continue despite. So, thank you.
One question. The contaminants then change all the time, correct? And therefore, if the contaminant change, does the way we test them, what you just explained, changes too, or it's the same methodology?
Well, so the contaminants continue to grow because the historic contaminants are still there. So we're still dealing with metals and other things, but new contaminants are appearing. Their argument is that rather than trying to figure out exactly every single new contaminant and develop new analyses for each of those, focusing on the effects on the organisms is a much more holistic approach, a much more integrated approach. And that's what we're most concerned about. Of course, we're concerned about the levels of contaminants in the environment, but really what we're concerned about is how does it affect the organisms within the system.
This is like backing into, starting from the effect and going back to see what was there.
Yeah, use the effects as a screening tool to say, okay, this is an area, this is a system, a location where we really need to be more aware of that, and then we can do more detailed testing to identify what the particular contaminants or mix of contaminants and stressors might be that's causing those large effects.
Is this a drastic shift from where you were before?
It is a pretty significant shift, I would say. But it's not only in the deltas. Actually, EPA has been pushing this sort of an approach and has in the paper they highlight a program within the EPA that's looking at the same sort of tools. And the European Union has a very similar approach that is this effects-dominated approach rather than...
And you would say that this methodology will dominate going forward?
I think it's a very useful tool that I think we can't get away, though, from how do we convert that into regulation to set a value. So that's, I think, where there's a real challenge.
But it could be challenged, do you think, in terms of, are there people that would advocate against this kind of methodology in order to know what's there and how it impacts?
I haven't heard that. I think it would have to be in addition to the evaluations of individual contaminants. So it requires more resources. So I think that would be the challenge: is do we have the resources to put into a mix of approaches?
I'm just worried that, if the methodology that was used before has missed, or this is a whole new, more advanced, enhanced.
I think it's more sensitive and more, so rather than looking at are we killing organisms, looking at these approaches that look at more subtle effects are what's necessary.
Okay, thank you.
Good.
Thanks, John.
Okay, so I have a few other items to highlight. And actually, if you could go to the next slide. So I wanted to let you know that Estuary News is a magazine that goes out across the whole Bay and Delta to managers, stakeholders, scientists, everyone interested in the estuary, and is put out by the San Francisco Estuary Partnership. We're we're a sponsor and a partner in supporting this. And they recently have started putting out these pearls, estuary pearls, highlighting really key articles and key issues that they want people to be aware of within the news, that go out as an email to highlight new issues. And one thing, a new effort within this that's being tried is to highlight articles within San Francisco Estuary and Watershed Science within the pearls. So not just focusing on individual issues, but highlighting articles that are published in the journal that we support, San Francisco Estuary Watershed Science, so that it reaches a much wider audience and a broader readership. So this is a pearl. Each pearl includes a photo like this, and then the next slide, it includes a brief summary of the article. This was about the drought synthesis paper that you heard about a few months ago, and is just an overview of the drought synthesis to try to reach a broader audience and to bring in readership to the San Francisco Estuary Watershed Science. So this is a new initiative, and we'll see if it works. If it does make some more people aware of the journal, they have about 5 articles that they've put up as these sort of broader public summaries, and I think it's a valuable effort given our focus and your interest in communication efforts of how we can make science available to a broader audience. One other thing that's also being done is to highlight work of recent and upcoming retirees within the system, so that we don't lose that institutional knowledge, and we acknowledge the contributions of those. So I just wanted to let you know about that new feature, these estuary pearls. And there's a web page that's included in the summary for you that if you'd like to, you can subscribe and you can get these pearls. They don't come all the time, but with every month or so, they'll give you an update of some of the recent issues. Okay, so then 2 other items to highlight. A recent symposium that we had that I mentioned earlier was on environmental DNA. And environmental DNA is the DNA, any tissue that, skin falls off of us, or a bit of plant material falls off of a plant into the water, that the DNA then enters into the water column. And if you collect water samples and concentrate it, you can look at the DNA within that water or within the soil and use that as a sampling method to identify organisms that are in the area. This is a relatively somewhat new technique. Over the last decade, it's being developed. It's been used widely in lakes where the water stays relatively stable. It's more challenging to use in rivers and estuaries where the water's moving and carrying that DNA around. But we had a symposium last month to talk about this method in general and how it can be applied to the Delta and the estuary as a whole. And unfortunately, I was unable to attend. I was busy interviewing the ISB candidates, but by all accounts, it really was an outstanding overview. It was actually the first time that we've done a live broadcast of one of our symposia, and we had a good audience both there in person. It was completely sold out, or completely wasn't no charge, but it was full. And there was also a significant audience watching remotely. So I think some of the key highlights there were similar to what I mentioned with the contaminants tool. This is a really valuable tool that we need to be aware of. Not something that we shouldn't dump our traditional sampling methods, but we should be thinking about how we can use this as a companion, and then down the road it may be something that will be much more cost effective than other sorts of field sampling methods. So it's something to sort of have on your radar and be aware of. Any questions on the environmental DNA? Okay, and then the last conference to highlight is the National Council for Science and the Environment had their annual conference back in DC in early January, and Kate Mellinson, our Sea Grant Fellow, who's engaged on science and policy issues, was able to attend. The National Council on Science and Environment is a nonpartisan group of universities and professional societies that was founded in the 90s to promote the use of science for good policy. And so this was just an opportunity for us to participate in this at a national level, see what's being done in other systems, and bring back some of the information, especially around science communication issues to our staff. So I just wanted to let you know about that. Upcoming items to be aware of. The Interagency Ecological Programs Annual Workshop is next month, March 18th to 20th. A number of our staff will be attending, and it's along with the Bay Delta Science Conference, one of the local events that's really widely attended and really valuable to get an update on current issues. So that's an important conference coming up. Next month, I will update you on the Estuary Connectivity Symposium that we just recently had, as well as a workshop on integrated modeling that was a really valuable discussion on how we can improve modeling efforts here within the Delta. So then the last item I wanted to highlight for you is the By the Numbers report. So that's also in your binder, or in your purple folder. And you'll see that things have changed dramatically and have gone from lots of green that we had earlier in the winter to only about 50% of precipitation throughout the watershed, 50% of snowpack. Reservoir levels still remain very high, so that's a good thing. A one-year drought or a one-year low rainfall period is problematic, but not enormously so. But if this is something that will continue on to multiple years, then that's when we really need to be concerned. But I just wanted to highlight for you that, yeah, we definitely, this month will be almost certainly the first February since I heard since the 1860s that we've had no rain in Northern California, no rain in Sacramento or San Francisco for the entire month of February. Even though it's 29 days, we still didn't even get any rain.
Yeah.
So that's, unless there's questions on By the Numbers, I'll finish with that.
Did you have a question, Ken?
Asked for the chair's indulgence if I could have a minute to go back to the chair's report. I wanted to show the council just something really quickly that we had some technical difficulties with.
Okay. Is the slide available? Okay. Go ahead, Ken.
Okay. No, thank you. I wanted to, and it's a good follow-up to John's report on rainfall. It just sort of, this is a map. I don't know, can we get it full screen or? Water Reuse Association just released a map, and it's kind of a good follow-up from our October meeting in Orange County, where we were talking about reduced reliance and local projects. And this is kind of a map of California potable reuse projects. The governor's resilience portfolio had a big segment on water recycling and a very ambitious goal to achieve. And this is kind of looking at not all recycling, but it's looking at potable reuse, which is, what we saw in Orange County Water District and some of the panelists we had. But, if you put it all together between groundwater recharge and what's called reservoir augmentation, there's over 500,000 acre feet of projects in planning, and they're kind of, spread out, not through the whole state, about as far north as as Santa Clara Valley, but you could just see there's a lot of activity going on, and just to kind of keep water supply reliability in top of mind for us, just wanted to share this, and I don't know, maybe we can kind of help water reuse sort of get this message out on really what's going on out there, and how ambitious it is, and give these local agencies credit, because they are making big investments in reduced reliance. So,
Thank you, Ken. What under permitted groundwater?
permitted groundwater is existing projects, so that's like the Orange County.
Oh, already permitted.
It's
I see.
about 200,000 acre feet, and so, but you've got another, almost 400,000 acre feet of planned groundwater
Planned,
projects, and then about 120,000 acre feet of reservoir. So you really, there's quite a bit of moving towards achieving that goal that's in the governor's resilience portfolio.
Yeah.
Just need to get more of the state active.
Thank you, Ken.
I
Any
have a quick
questions?
question, and I don't know, because you're showing the reservoirs, and then in the light of all this, the whole federal government mandate of draining Anderson Reservoir because of flooding chance. I mean, where would the flooding? I mean, if this is
Well,
the reality of everything, how would?
I think the case of Anderson is has to do with seismicity issues and safety.
Not because of the level of water.
Correct.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay,
Is that
thank you.
okay?
Chair Tatayan, if I can just announce, the meeting services team is working to make copies of this map for the public to be made available, because they just got it. So I want the public to know that they're working.
Okay.
Earlier to staff, but when I realized it was a 20 megabyte file, I was like, maybe I shouldn't email that. So I apologize for getting this to you guys late.
Okay. Thank you, Ken. Any other questions? Nope. Well, then we will move on to agenda item 9, release of the draft public participation plan for public comment.
Okay, great. Thank you. Staff are pleased to be able to present to the council a public participation plan draft to receive your feedback, and also to begin receiving feedback from the public. This kicks off a public review period for the plan. This is just one component of an overall new communication strategy that we've been discussing with you over the fall and winter. The council was created with public participation at top of mind by the legislature. In establishing our body, they drew upon recommendations from the Delta Vision Task Force back in 2008, which really described the need for a more transparent and participatory forum for decisions that affect the Delta. And we've learned a lot here, with 10 years of experience at the council in public engagement, what to do better, what not to do. And we've put that here in this draft for further input and discussion. And so at the table, we have Brandon Chapin, who is our meeting services and special projects manager, and he's been taking the lead on this project, so he will present the draft plan to you.
Thank you. And good morning, Chair Tatayan and council members. I'm excited to present this draft plan. This has been a long process of getting input on getting to this draft in the first place. I'm excited that we're able to present it to you today. Can everybody hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Brandon.
So really quick, just to put some guidelines on what the discussion will be today. We'll first go into what is a public participation plan and why are a lot of organizations moving towards them. I'll go over the outreach that we've done to date on the plan, and also the outreach that'll be in the future on a draft plan. I'll review some of the components of the draft public participation plan for you. And then we'll have some discussion and council feedback on what your guys' thoughts on the draft plan and what we should consider incorporating if we missed anything. And then also just the last next steps after this in terms of public input on the draft plan. So first, I think it's important just to kind of set up what public participation is in the first place. Public participation is the act of ensuring that the public has opportunities to inform governmental organizations' decision-making. And as Jessica mentioned, the council was founded on a basis of public input into decision-making on the Delta. And as the council's always had a commitment to outreach up in what it does. But this public participation plan ensures that we continue to do that and helps address public uncertainty by helping interested members of the public know about the opportunities to engage in the council's decision-making and where those opportunities are. As she also mentioned, it's part of the communications strategy, but it's also its own product. Communications is making sure that we get the information out that we want, but public participation is making sure that the public can provide input on what we're working on. And I think one of the important notes to make here is that this plan is based on a no one-size-fits-all approach. Every project and decision that the council makes has various different public participation needs and information that we might need from the public to craft good public policy. And so the real crux of this plan is that this is a suite of options that the council can use to get public participation on each of the projects and decisions that it makes. And we'll go over that suite in a few minutes. So for the outreach to date, on the left side here in that diagram, you have the green boxes are what's been done up to date, and then on the right is what will be future outreach with this draft plan now that it's been developed and released. So first, staff has gone through some lessons learned, what has been some feedback that we've received on previous council projects and decisions, what are best practices in general. We've used a lot of research into the International Association of Public Participation and what their best practices are. And then also looking at what other agencies do. Public participation plans are a thing that's really growing in terms of for governmental organizations that work in the environment and also just local issues, just to make it clear for the public to be able to know when they can impact decision making. There's also a public survey that you might remember we released early last year, and I'll go over the results of that in a second. And then the last thing up to this point that's been gone into the development of this plan is direct outreach to established groups. And what I mean by that is that there's for example, the Delta Protection Commission's Delta Protection Advisory Committee. We've presented to that group to get input on the survey results and then also just to make sure we were going on the right track a few months ago. And then also through other projects that we've worked on, we've sat in on meetings with community-based organizations to get a kind of understanding of what they're looking for in terms of reaching out to their communities. And then in the future, there's today's council workshop where we look to get input from you all and then also the public. The development of the communication strategy that will be released in the next few months. And then also public comment on this draft plan. And there will also be a few opportunities for in-person comments that I'll touch on later with an open house and a webinar. So a quick overview of the survey. As I mentioned, it was undertaken in early 2019. The survey online was sent to covered action participants, public commenters, mailing lists, the council's listserv that we have, and then also on social media. We received almost 100 participants, which was a pretty good sample size, but it also was not the end-all be-all of what, as I mentioned, of the outreach of what went into this development of the plan. So for a few highlights of the results from that survey, we asked from the beginning, overall, how would you rate the council's efforts to engage the public? And as you can see, it went exactly 50-50. So 50% of people felt that we were doing excellent or good, and 50% felt that we could make improvements, so we were doing fair or poor. So we take that to heart. We understand that overall the council has had public participation be a cornerstone of what it does, but we have some work to do in trying to improve how we outreach to the public that's interested.
Mike?
Just a quick second question. Some of those numbers look very round, and so I'm just curious, what was the total denominator? What was the sample size? How big was our survey on that?
So it was 86 participants, so almost 100.
Okay.
And then it actually did end up exactly round numbers like
That's
that.
crazy.
It's surprising.
It
was exactly
like 10?
50-50.
Okay. All right, perfect. Thank you.
Yep. So just a quick overview of the other input that we received in the survey. We asked a few questions to try to get out what the council does well. And one thing you'll notice between this slide and the next slide is that a lot of what's on what we do well is also can be found on what we need to improve on, which I think also reflects the 50-50 input that we received.
Which is code for no one's ever going to be happy.
Yeah. So what the council does well, we disseminate information well. We have open and transparent public meetings and hearings. The council encourages stakeholder feedback, provides balance, is respectful. We make it easy to participate remotely by webcasting our meetings. We provide the detailed information, and of particular note that was called out was the staff reports that we provide. And then we select locations that have plenty of room for participants to engage. What the council could improve, transparency, getting the word out about issues, listening, following up to relay decisions, getting public input early, meeting outside of Sacramento more often, the ease of finding submitted comments online, so being able to find online if someone submitted something that it's up there and everyone can see it, speaking times at meetings, and then outreach to disadvantaged communities in California Native American tribes.
Excuse me, transparency in terms of the decisions.
Yeah, how decisions
Like
are.
why we made this decision or why we came
Yeah.
up with this solution.
And one thing that was at the crux of that also was that how public comments are used. So how if someone provides input, how that input ends up in final products. So a quick overview of the takeaways that we took from the survey. Meeting outside Sacramento area more often was a big one. Communicating about the use of public comments, as I just mentioned to Councilmember Moranian. Expanding awareness of the council's role in the Delta and the state as a whole. Addressing the lack of familiarity of the availability of information online, so make it easier to find things. Early outreach is preferred, so early in the project's development. And then engagement with disadvantaged communities in California Native American tribes is key for when we're reaching out. All right, any other questions on the survey results before I move into the draft plan? Okay. So just some quick pictures of the past year of council meetings that we've had, just to remind everyone of what we've done. So there are some minimum requirements that the council has to follow and has followed for public participation. Now let's do a quick overview of these. So there's a Delta Reform Act that established the council, but it also requires the council to meet at least once per month, and in the legal Delta at least twice per year. And it also established the council. There's the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act, which sets timeframes for noticing of our public meetings. So the council meetings, the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee, the Independent Science Board meetings, and any other subcommittees that we establish need to follow this act. We need to be able to provide materials, as Bethany mentioned. If we provide something to you all on the council, we have to be able to provide it to the public as well. And then also establishing a process for hearing public comments at meetings. The California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, has some public comment requirements that we have to follow. The Administrative Procedures Act has some requirements for public comments on regulatory, any rulemaking for new or amended regulations, including how we respond to those comments. And then AB 52 that addresses tribal consultation, establishes a process for how public agencies interact with California Native American tribes in regards to CEQA projects. So overall in this plan, there are some foundational elements that we've established that flow throughout all the strategies that we've laid out in the plan and the suite of options. So we want to make sure that we're communicating how public comments are used whenever feasible. Understanding impacts of the decisions, of any decisions that we made, so ensuring that there's an opportunity to hear input that helps us to understand the impact. Ensuring that there's a clear process for anyone that's interested to participate in our decision-making process. Continuous evaluation is a real undertone of this plan. So if there's new best practices that arise or anything that anyone out there is doing that's new that we can try to incorporate, we want to look into that and see if we can. And then lastly, to value and promote equity, inclusion, and diversity in our public outreach processes. right, so now I'm going to, as I mentioned, there's a suite of public involvement.
Quick question
Yeah.
on the presentation to the council on priorities report
Mhm.
outreach. This has never been done before? Like, we don't report back anywhere of the prior year?
We do.
We do, but is it still one of the,
It's a foundational element to ensure that we continue to do it in the future and establish that for the public to understand it. That's a commitment that we make. So as I mentioned, this is not a one-size-fits-all plan. So this suite of public involvement is the different strategies that we use for any project that the council undertakes or decision that you all make as the council members. So there's our public meetings. So there's the meetings of the council, the Delta, the DPIC, the ISB. One thing of note in the plan is we want to make sure that locations of these meetings are held within close to where decisions are impacting. So for example, if there's a certification of consistency hearing, everything that we can is within reason to have that meeting close to where that impact is or where that project is located. Public comments, so we always have public comments at our council meetings, as I mentioned, under Bagley-Keene, and then also we have public comment periods, 30-day public comment periods, and public forums where public comments are always welcome and can be provided. Outreach to community-based organizations, so I mentioned that was part of a takeaway from the survey. One new approach that the council is looking to take is that whenever is collaborating with community-based organizations, which are organizations dedicated to representing and working with distinct local communities to assist us with the outreach to those communities. And they know best about how to reach out to their whatever community they represent. And so collaborating with them to assist us in reaching those communities. We have Delta Science Program events, so whether that's symposia, brown bags, conferences, the like, where the public's always welcome. Tribal consultation, so I mentioned AB 52, but the council also has a tribal consultation policy where we reach out to California Native American tribes that may be impacted to inform them of what we're working on. Outreach to external groups, so I also mentioned that during the development of this plan, we reached out to the Delta Protection Advisory Committee. So going out to where the meetings already are occurring in the Delta or the state of getting input from groups that are already meeting. One thing we've often heard is meeting fatigue in the Delta. So understanding that there's already meetings that are occurring. So let's try to present at these groups that are meeting as well, gather input from there. Doesn't negate that we might have public workshops or anything that are our own meetings, but using what's already out there and available to get input as well. Public forums, as I mentioned, so workshops that either at council meetings or individual workshops that are council-led. One other thing that I'll mention that we're doing for the draft public participation plan is an open house. So that's one new thing that we're looking to try to do, and that's where we have, during a set amount of time, anyone can come by during, say it's a 2-hour time frame, anyone can come by and talk with council staff about specific projects that we're there to discuss. And it can be a one-on-one individual conversation to understand where concerns are. That also tries to get at the issues with people having a lot of constraints on their time. So allowing a 2-hour period where they can come by any time rather than having to be there for an entire 2 hours can help to address that issue. Online engagement, so our communications shop does a great job online of social media, so using that as well to gather any input from any interested parties. And then lastly, staff assistance. So we always have staff from the council that are available to assist anyone that would like to provide comments, either at council meetings or at workshops. We're always open to receive comments online via email too, or by mail, and disseminating those to the council or what ISB or DPIC, depending on who it's addressed to. Are there any questions with any of these?
I have a question, but which is not covered probably here. When we had a meeting in Orange County and last year in there were agencies like the county and the city of Los Angeles and Bureau of Sanitation that participated. And we talked a lot about what they're doing, and they have an idea of, the stuff that we're doing. And I've been asked a few times lately if there's anything visual that is prepared that shows the scientific work that is being done on the Delta, that shows the facts of the whole idea of the change and the adaptive management and any of that. I'm wondering if ever anything was made, any visual, any presentation of what the science board is advising the Delta to do, and what is the nature of this work, because they think that these agencies think that they can use this in terms of, explaining. So my question was, is there ever anything has been done like that visually, like a presentation of some kind of a video or there is resources for creating anything like that as a part of our public outreach?
Specifically for science or just for anything?
Specifically, I was asked for science, and the reason that the science keeps coming up is that it's kind of perceived as this organization, the Delta Stewardship Council, is perceived as an organization that has the most of the science or the best science or any of that, at least with the people that I talk. And they kind of don't probably, it's hard to understand, right, the impact of that on what we're doing, and impact of that, the policies that come out, or decisions that are being made. You talked about transparency or whatever. Why is it? So I'm trying to see if there is ever budget for that, if there is consensus of producing anything like that, and what does it take, or a little bit about that.
Yeah, the annual report that recently came out summarizes current issues. The Delta Challenges report, I think, is one of the valuable reports. But in terms of videos, we haven't done.
It's never been done.
We haven't done.
And there's no resources for doing it.
Yeah.
We've done short video blogs, but not some sort of full-length video featuring science or the science program.
Science program,
I guess,
the impact of the science program on the decisions that we make, for them to understand, really. At the bottom line is that this is a product to show them what is going on and how that impacts them. And we probably are the body that can present this the best.
Yeah, I think, what I'm hearing from your question, Maria, is maybe it's a good idea to produce an information video about how the Delta Science Program and the Independent Science Board science findings inform the decisions and policies that the council makes.
Exactly.
Yeah. Ken?
At our 2 retreats in the last year, we talked a lot about the communications plan, and staff came back to us, and I think, Councilmember Moranian's bringing up a good point. These are all elements of an overall communication plan, and how do we communicate the science program's role, and, it's part of this bigger strategy that I don't think we've really finalized yet.
Yeah, I think this is a key thing that we've recognized and that we have discussed at the last 2 retreats is how do we do a better job both communicating complicated science, but also elevating the role of the science program and influencing decision-making writ large in the Delta. And so that is something that we are, I think, focusing on in the communication strategy. A video would be great. I think that we have to look into what kind of resources we have to produce something like that. But we are certainly aware of the need that you have described and thinking of ways to fill that need.
We look for some kind of a resource to do that, because people are not going to sit there and read the stuff, right? In these agencies, chances are, or if they read it, they're not going to understand probably half of it. So this lack of transparency of where the decisions are made and how we move forward with certain policies are going to be continuing if it's not really decoded for, not only the general public, but agencies that, are impacted and their modality of work changes because what happens in the Delta in some level,
Yeah, I think one of the ways that we do that really well now is through our social media. We have a Science Friday, for example, exhibit on Twitter and social media where we talk specifically about the work we're doing or others in the Delta community on science and how that's impacting decision making. So I think we've got all those building blocks. I think you're maybe talking about packaging it in new forms. Yeah.
Yeah, and I will
That's
just
good.
add in terms of the Independent Science Board's role, that is one question that we've gotten in interviewing candidates is what's the impact of the Independent Science Board and how is their work being done? And we're undertaking a review currently. The current Independent Science Board members are very much aware of that and thinking, and they actually their approach has changed and they've been putting out, in addition to their standard reviews, much more condensed one-page summaries that should reach a broader audience. So probably in the summer, our internal review will be done in terms of looking at the Independent Science Board's reports and what impact that's had on policy or management issues. So we can update you on that when that's completed. And then we could think about how we could make that information available in an easily digested way.
Yeah. So I'm encouraging all of us to look into resources of putting this together and creating something that could be put out there.
One component that I heard of your question as well is where can it be clear where the points of public involvement might be in a project. And so one thing that we're working on at the council is establishing process maps as well during projects. So it is clear and it's easy to understand of where those opportunities are to provide input.
How would you define the term public?
Any interested member that any interested person that's in what we're doing.
The public, I think we need to define that concept. Because the public is just the Delta? Is it beyond the Delta? Is it everybody in the state of California, state agency? I just think you have to focus on that word public. That's my view. In order to come up with maybe review the suite of public involvement. If you were doing that, I think you'd have to include parts of California that aren't mentioned here.
Oh, for sure.
I think one of the very challenging things about communicating our work is that there are so many different audiences, and it's part of the reason why we're not putting forth a one-size-fits-all outreach program for every single thing we do. We have some activities that are primarily scientists in the Delta that are interested, others that are primarily maybe Clarksburg residents that are interested, and or Southern California water managers. So depending on, it's really topic driven as to who our audience is, and I think that's something that's recognized in this draft public participation plan. You may recall that at the last retreat with the council members, we went through an audience mapping exercise, and this is something that we're really focusing on in our communication strategy. And it relates to the challenge of communicating science, too, because there are many ways that we communicate the science that we're working on or that we become aware of or that we're synthesizing to the science community so that they can use it. But then, obviously, we have other audiences that we want to make sure understand the right research that's going on out there and how that impacts management issues in the Delta.
And one part of the outreach on the draft plan during the public comment period is a statewide webinar specifically for that reason, so that anyone can provide input in a statewide online.
Maybe just to continue the focus on here on the draft plan, Brandon, I think it's a really good idea to kind of put this out here as kind of like guidelines or a framework for general public involvement. It seems like a lot of it is communicating the opportunities for stakeholder input, and maybe we can bring that out a little bit more. It's just this issue of tailoring things, because when we come out with the ecosystem amendment, there should be a tailored communications plan that focuses on that. What is the message we want to get out to all of our publics? Like Frank says, it's pretty large audience or very diversified audience. On this, I think it's an opportunity, and I won't put you guys through we tried to read my writing. I was on the plane and kind of writing this stuff, and it's hard to read. But I think it's an opportunity to more strongly talk about the council, because one thing I noticed is that we didn't talk about the co-equal goals. So it's like anything that we put out, especially when we're talking about the council, it's like, we want to, our mission is to achieve the co-equal goals, and we've developed policies and programs to do that and implement the Delta plan. And then there's these opportunities for public participation and stakeholder involvement and input. And so, I just had some suggestions to just bring a stronger message about the council, and this as an opportunity, and I can get you legible comments on that. I thought that you talked about kind of mapping, and I thought, charts could help in this also. But I think a lot of it is opportunities for public involvement. Where can you provide input? And then some of it, is more nuanced, like the science program. We're communicating with these different audiences, and we've got the ISB, but maybe that's kind of the issue, is we should talk about that maybe in a preamble, is that this is, maybe a little more strongly about what we want the public to do with this. Is this just about identifying these are your general opportunities? We're developing policies and programs and all that kind of stuff. And we want, maybe it's also sort of a little more proactive, is, hey, part of our job is to seek input. We want input. We have multiple ways for you to input into this. So, I don't know. I think it's really good. I think it serves a good purpose and becomes, one of the elements of this bigger communications plan. Because I think, Maria, I think you're sort of bringing up an issue I completely agree with you on, is we need to raise the profile of the science program, but we got to explain to a wider array of stakeholders the value of it and what it's used for. Because if we can't build support for the things that we want to see done, then, that's going to limit our effectiveness. And I always tie it back to legislatively mandated co-equal goals. That's our purpose in life. So I think if we can do some of that a little more and maybe make it clearer where the opportunities for input are and how we communicate in some of these other areas. And you also get an opportunity for input there.
Okay, great.
So, thank you. No, really good report.
Yeah, I think your written comments would be really helpful there, particularly on pages 5 and 6, the what is the Delta Stewardship Council section.
That's where most of my time. You want them readable.
Any other questions on this week? So the last section of the plan is how we evaluate and make sure that we're actually doing what we strive to do. So part of this will be a periodic survey and assessment on the council's public engagement efforts, and the results of those surveys, of that survey, and then also just prior year's outreach will be part of the annual report every year that's provided to the council and the public. And then again, like I mentioned, it's no one-size-fits-all approach to this plan. So we're going to continually evaluate new opportunities that are new best practices for reaching out to interested parties for the council. Okay, we already kind of jumped into some of these discussion questions, but is there anything in particular in the plan? Is there anything missing? Or is there anything that you all have seen at other organizations that they do for public involvement that we at the council should consider?
Any other suggestions from the council?
It's not necessarily,
You form stakeholder groups when we have a specific initiative that we're trying to do. I don't know, I know we spend a lot of time with the science community, but do we get out at other conferences, interact with professional associations just to kind of, tell them, hey, here's what we're doing. And it may not be just general public. It may be kind of, environmental planners or things like that to just, go to their lunches or get on a panel those kind of things, just to start broadening out who we're speaking to, and whether it's, community groups in the Delta. I think we do that, but, how do we broaden that out and be, there's a conference that's going to be at UC Davis, and I think, we've had staff appear at it, what's the name of it? It's it's a water conference, but it's a mix of environmental organizations, and it's kind of unique, water managers and academics, and it just seems like those kind of opportunities for us to get out to a broader audience and tell all the great stuff that staff is working on and the science program's working on, so that we're not as insular to the Delta science community or, just the people who have specific interests in some of the things we're doing.
The short answer is yes, constantly, but always open to new opportunities.
I would say if you're aware of opportunities, let us know. And we're trying the National Conference on Ecosystem Restoration, not a local effort, but something that connects all of the large-scale coastal ecosystems around the country. We're very much engaged. Probably 6 or 7 of the staff will be presenting at that up in Portland. I
think like the Association of Environmental Planners and, those kind, they always have lunches.
Jessica Law,
we're actually very engaged.
Very much engaged with that group and has attended all of their, so I don't go to those, but I know I think Jeff and Jessica both are engaged on that.
Yeah, I mean, it should be, speakers, just sharing our information, just to somehow get a broader audience.
Yes.
Well, we will strive to go to even more venues.
Copious extra time.
Yeah.
No, but
Maybe not
I do,
more,
I do
or-
think
or
that, and I'd be happy to sit down with you. We actually keep pretty detailed records of those for our own internal management, and it would be interesting for you to see a cross-section of what we're doing in a given month.
I will mention in the plan, there's a part that mentions that if there is any group out there that's interested in having a council present on a project, to reach out to us.
Yes.
Madam Chair, just a quick comment. So I understand. First of all, thank you, Brandon, for the very thorough, extremely thorough public participation plan. I think it's critically important that an agency like this have in writing sort of what it plans to do in terms of public engagement. And I think you've laid out an extensive list of ways in which we can engage the public on a whole range of issues, some of which are somewhat benign and others are very personal for folks who are going to be living the changes that we're affecting. So I think it's important that folks know kind of what the steps are that we will take to be honest in our engagement with the public. The one thing that I will sort of underscore a little bit on your presentation on page 12, the foundational elements, the top one, communicate how public comments are used. I think this one, at least for me, is critically important in light of the fact that the public engagement process is a very imperfect process, right? I mean, it's just impossible to be perfect in this venue, but it's essential, and there's nothing probably worse than having a huge turnout with a big issue and take thousands of comments lasting hours into the evening, and then there's no feedback to the public about how that information was used. And that may be the beginning of the end of the effectiveness of the plan, because people who had to get childcare, had to leave work early, had to drive an hour to the meeting, had to stick around for 3 hours of public testimony when all they had was just 2 minutes of what they wanted to say. And absent having a framed conversation so that folks know, okay, this isn't about a yes/no to the project that's being considered. It's actually, we're looking for comments on a more narrowly focused area whereby some of the decisions have been made, some were already in statute, some have already been sort of discussed. And so we're not starting over. So I think managing expectations can be one of the more challenging aspects of public engagement, because nobody wants to tell the public, well, out of these 10 things we're considering, 7 are already been determined, and the 3 are the ones that we have some wiggle room, and we'd like to hear the public. Nobody likes to say that, but I think that's essential so that you've got an honest, open, transparent public communication process, because if you get everybody to show up and they pour their hearts out about the project thinking that there's somebody interested in learning or hearing from them, they're not going to come back. And that's the beginning of the end of the process. So I underscore that, given my experience in having tried to figure out how to engage the public. But I just know that's just an essential part of a more thoughtful, a process that requires a more thoughtful consideration as we do our engagement. And like Ken talked about, I mean, you go to these events, you got to be mindful about what you're soliciting, because if the public doesn't hear back, it may be the one and done, event. So anyhow, I share that as something to consider as we go forward. Yeah. But otherwise, I love what you've done. There's a lot of good stuff in here, a lot of good ways to tackle it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Okay, you want to talk quickly about next steps?
Yes. Let me shoot ahead really quick. All right, so next steps. So as I mentioned, a draft plan was just released today. It's available for public comment through March 31st, so anyone can email comments anytime to engage@deltacouncil.ca.gov. That goes to us. But then there's also 2 in-person opportunities to provide comments. So we're taking the show on the road and doing a public open house on March 5th. There's going to be 3 different stops on March 5th. So in the morning, we'll be here in Sacramento. In the early afternoon, we'll be in Walnut Grove at the Walnut Grove Library. And then in the evening, we'll be at the Big Break Center in Oakley. And so during those time frames, that we're in each location, anyone can come by and talk to us to provide comments and to just talk about the draft plan. And then for statewide participants, or anyone that's interested that can't attend any of those open houses, there will be a statewide webinar on March 24th, which will also be kind of a drop-in webinar, so anyone can come in and talk, or can log in and come and talk to us. And then after March 31st, we'll consider the comments that we've received, finalize the plan, and then bring it to you all for endorsement at the April-May council meeting.
Thank you, Brandon. Excellent work, very thorough work. Thanks to you and your team.
Okay. Thank you, Brandon.
Are folks feeling like no break? Let's keep going. Well, then let's move on to agenda item 10, Delta Conveyance update.
Okay, the Department of Water Resources released a notice of preparation on an environmental impact report for a new Delta Conveyance project on January 15th of 2020, and they've been conducting scoping meetings for that project in the Delta and throughout the state over recent weeks. In addition, on behalf of DWR, the Delta Conveyance Design and Construction Authority, or the DCDCA, has been facilitating a stakeholder engagement committee to advise them on siting considerations related to the design of several features of the proposed project. So we've invited representatives of both to come and address the council and to tell us what they've been doing and what they've been hearing. Thank you.
Great. Thank you both for joining us today, taking the time. I know you guys are incredibly busy, so thank you.
Quick introduction. Carrie Buckman is here. She's an environmental program manager for Delta Conveyance at the Department of Water Resources. And to her left is Catherine Mallon, executive director of the Delta Conveyance Design and Construction Authority.
Here we go. Good morning. When I last came to this group, we were in December, and we hadn't yet released the notice of preparation. So at that point, I talked a little bit about the overall process, where we were going, and I also introduced the Delta Conveyance Design and Construction Authority, or DCA. So today, the notice of preparation is out. I came back to provide an update, and then Catherine Mallon is here to talk more about the DCA and their Stakeholder Engagement Committee. So just as an overview, I think we talked about this the last time, but I just wanted to show this slide again to talk about the idea that we are at the very beginning of a lengthy environmental review process. So in January, we released the Notice of Preparation, or NOP, and we are currently in scoping meetings where we are listening to a lot of feedback on the notice of preparation and the process. From here, we will produce a summary report of what we hear during scoping, which will help inform an outreach plan. From there, we will further define the project by identifying alternatives and analyzing the impacts of those alternatives, which will lead us into a draft EIR, which is again another opportunity for substantial public outreach, where we'll hear feedback on the draft EIR and have public meetings on it as well. We will use those comments to develop a final EIR. So the purpose of the notice of preparation is to document the intent to develop an EIR for the Delta Conveyance Project. It triggers the start of scoping to receive comments on the scope of the analysis and the alternatives. It describes the proposed project, including probable environmental effects, and provides notice about scoping meetings and how to make a comment. So I wanted to highlight that the NOP is not a decision document. We do have to include a proposed project as a CEQA requirement, as a way for the public to have something to respond to in their public comments. However, it is the beginning of the process. We have not made a decision on what to implement. We will be further considering alternatives suggested during scoping and analyzing that in the environmental impact report before reaching a decision. So the purpose and objectives describe the underlying reasons that DWR is considering a Delta Conveyance project. The purpose is to develop new diversion and conveyance facilities in the Delta necessary to restore and protect the reliability of water deliveries in a cost-effective manner consistent with the state's water resilience portfolio. And our specific objectives are to address sea level rise and climate change, minimize water supply disruption due to seismic risk, protect water supply reliability, and provide operational flexibility to improve aquatic conditions. Okay. The proposed project area includes areas where we are considering facilities as well as areas that may have possible direct or indirect effects. So the main construction would be within the statutory delta, shown on the proposed project area figure, but there could be direct and indirect impacts in the waterways that flow into the delta upstream or in the areas that receive water. The green areas show the State Water Project, and the yellow areas show that potentially we could be affecting Central Valley Project as well. The proposed project facilities include intake facilities on the Sacramento River, and this map is a little hard to read on this screen, but I do want to highlight that this is in the notice of preparation as well. So the map shows 3 potential locations of intake facilities, but we would only be selecting 2 of those facilities. There would be tunnel reaches and tunnel shafts to reach the southern forebay site, 2 forebays potentially, one in the middle and one in the southern end to help moderate hydraulics within the tunnels, a pumping plant to pump water from the tunnel up into the southern forebay, and conveyance facilities to convey water from that southern forebay to the existing South Delta pumping facilities. In the notice of preparation, the proposed project includes 2 options for tunnel corridors. There is a yellow option through the Central Delta that's pretty similar to the alignment considered for Waterfix. And we've also added a purple alignment to look at potential trade-offs between moving that alignment to other locations. At this point, we do not have a preference between those 2 alignments. The NOP includes a proposed project capacity of 6,000 cubic feet per second, or CFS, and that would involve 2 intakes of 3,000 CFS each. The NOP identifies that we will likely consider alternatives to the proposed project capacity in the range of 3,000 CFS to 7,500 CFS, but the final decision on alternatives won't be made until after we complete scoping and hear all of the scoping comments. Which leads us to alternatives development. DWR will select a reasonable range of potentially feasible alternatives that meet the project objectives and present opportunities to reduce impacts. And the scoping period provides an opportunity for the public to comment on alternatives. So after scoping, we will use the ideas that we hear and the feedback that we receive to formulate a set of alternatives for further evaluation in the EIR, and we will publicize that information. So I did want to highlight that we are currently accepting scoping comments. So if people are interested, we would really encourage people to submit comments by March 20th. They can be submitted electronically by email or an online form, by mail, or at public meetings, which I Yes, we have one more public meeting scheduled in Reading on March 2nd. We have completed 7 of the 8 public meetings. Originally, we had 7 scheduled, but we heard from a number of parties that people wanted a meeting north of the Delta so that we could hear ideas about potential effects up there. So we did schedule an additional meeting in Reading based on that feedback. And I think I always show this, but just to remind folks that may be listening that if you're interested, the best way to stay informed is to sign up for our email blast on our Delta Conveyance website. There's a button, and we send out regular updates via email. You can also just check our Delta Conveyance website and DWR's Twitter account. We have a project hotline and an email address. And with that, I think I will hand it over to Catherine.
Thanks, Carrie. All right. Hope my voice holds up. Feeling a little under the weather. Thanks. So I spent a little bit of time talking about the Stakeholder Engagement Committee that was recently formed last year. Not just for the purposes of the committee, but sort of the culture of the DCA in general. Our core values are around making sure that we're providing technical information timely way to the public. We want to facilitate public participation as we put our engineering drawings together that get submitted to DWR as part of the CEQA process. We want to make sure that they understand where we're coming from as we make decisions, and we want to encourage dialogue from them, facilitate their input. And I think as a public agency, the best way that you can build trust with the public is to be as transparent as possible, and when you make commitments, follow through and keep your word. So working with the DCA board, we developed a basic framework for this committee. There are 20 members. They were all appointed. Oh, thank you. That might help. Appointed by the DCA board. The committee is chaired by a DCA board member. Sarah Palmer from Zone 7 is currently the chair. We tried to get a representation of a diverse array of interests, both geographically and subject matter-wise. We asked, as part of the process, that each member seek out input from their broader Delta constituencies that they're representing on this board. Right now, we're meeting twice a week. Sessions are roughly 3 hours. They've been going a little bit over. In part, there's a lot of initial information to cover, so I know it's a hardship for a lot of people to be spending 3 hours twice a month, but so far we've had great attendance and good dialogue. Each meeting, there's extensive meeting minutes, and as we get further along in the process where there is specific feedback from the group, they will be doing report outs to our DCA board meetings, and they do get compensated for their time. This is a list of the members. We had about 40 applications and have 20 members currently. As you can see, we've got great representation throughout the Delta, and we've got a really diverse array of interests. Each county in the Delta has at least one at-large member, and then specific interest groups have representation. In some cases, we have ex officio members, and those are people that have a particular expertise that might be valuable to members of the committee. So, for example, Gil Cosio is an engineer that works with a lot of the reclamation districts in the Delta and has a lot of history, background, and technical knowledge around the levees there in particular. So, an example of an ex officio member. And then the DCA DWR team. This really is, even though it's a DCA effort, Carrie attends all of the meetings and really I see her as a co-sponsor of this effort. It is hard to detach the engineering from the environmental process. So I think she's as interested in hearing what people have to say at these meetings as the DCA is in putting together the engineering drawings. But as I said, Sarah Palmer, who is on the DCA board, chairs it, and there is a co-chair, Barbara Keegan, who is an alternate member of the DCA board. So each meeting has a basic framework. We start by approving the meeting minutes of the previous meeting. They're very comprehensive meeting minutes, nearly verbatim what is discussed. So there's a good tracking of the dialogue. We also keep track of every question that is asked at these meetings. We record them in a database, and then we follow up with answers to those questions at every meeting. Sometimes we can't get the answer within the 2-week turnaround, but then it remains open on the log so that they're seeing a responsiveness to all the questions that are being asked. We have a roundtable discussion on the previous meeting's topic that usually lasts about an hour, and then we move into the technical presentation for the meeting, and then we end with a public comment period. In between meetings, there's support calls from staff to see if there's any additional information they need or if they have any questions. And also, we're going to be scheduling some tours to various sites that are similar to what we're doing. So, for example, going up to Red Bluff and seeing the 2,500 CFS intake that exists up there, so they can, nothing better than putting your eyes on an actual facility to help you visualize what's being proposed in the Delta for this project. There's a tunnel under construction in Redwood City that is, although it's smaller in size, it's comparable in the terms of the logistics and operations. So the contractor there has agreed to facilitate a tour in early March. And also, now that we're getting closer to having locations of facilities on maps, the committee asked for a bus tour along each of these alignments and looking at potential sites for some of the facilities along the way. So we're going to be scheduling that in the next couple of weeks as well. So DCA is trying to be as responsive as possible to help provide information to this group so that they can opine as intelligently and as comfortably as they possibly can. Jeff asked that I just give you some brief examples of some of the material that we present at these meetings. For each of the facilities, we spend a lot of time talking about the siting criteria, what drove the selection process, and we share all of that information with the committee, in this case on the siting of the intakes. And the evaluation results, how the different potential sites scored in relationship to the evaluation criteria. We try to show renders and photos and diagrams as much as possible on the different types of facilities that we're looking at. In this case, for the intakes, we are looking at both vertical plate screens and vertical cylindrical T-screens. Each have their advantages and disadvantages. We share that with the committee. Here's an example of where we want to try to give people a better understanding of sort of the magnitude and scale of some of these facilities. So for the intakes, a lot of people are familiar with the intake that's in Freeport, just upstream of where we're proposing our intakes. It gave an example of how much larger our facility might be using cylindrical T-screens, and then again how its size if flat plate screens were used in this case. And again, just to get at scale for folks in the Delta who may not have seen anything of this magnitude. Lots of visualizations and renders. I think the group appreciates the visualizations more than looking at two-dimensional drawings, which are hard to understand in some cases. And we try to use animations as much as possible as well. We also, in some cases where we think there are significant construction effects at the site, talk about what those are and make that transparent and keep them up to date on some of the mitigation or effects reduction measures that we're trying to take to minimize those impacts. So in the case of the intakes where pile driving may be needed, we talked about some of the things that we're thinking about. Obviously still more work to do on that. Here's an example of, for each one of these facilities, we make sure they understand all of the activities that would take place at that site, so that they're educated on its purpose. Again, every facility has a construction schedule that we go through with them. on all the different key activities that take place over the construction period to construct these facilities and the activities that take place during construction. Here's an example of a launch shaft site. Where we show them the stockpiling of liners, the launch shaft where all of the liners come into the tunnel. The TBM is launched from that location, and we show the area that's needed for the stockpiling of the reusable tunnel material that's excavated during the drive. So again, trying to give them the information that they need to understand. What is the magnitude of this site? What's happening at this site? And how much area do you need for this facility? We always present our siting methodologies that we use to evaluate different sites. In this case, this is an example that was used for siting the launch shafts for the project. Those are sites that require a significant amount of area, and there's a lot of activity that goes on there. We've been working with them on siting facilities on both the central alignment and the eastern alignment. Here's an example of where we think launch shafts could go. We've bubbled those to get in between drives, and then we've grayed out areas which we just think are inappropriate for siting those facilities. And again, trying to make all that information transparent to folks. For each facility that needs to be siting, we show them the scoring using the methodology that was presented, and try to use, the standard orange, yellow, green methodology to show them how we see the favorability of various sites in those areas. Yep, so in terms of feedback and documentation, as I said, we've got detailed meeting minutes from every meeting. We also, within about 2 days of the meeting, we publicly issue a 2-page summary of what was discussed and what some of the comments and findings were. All of our meetings are subject to Brown Act. They're all live streamed. We archive all the videos, and they're available on the DCA website. At each one of our DCA board meetings, we do an update on the SEC meetings. And then we'll soon be doing report outs from our DCA board meetings as we get to a point where we've got substantive comments on the proposals on the table. Another thing that we've just recently rolled out with the committee is with each meeting trying to give them a guidance document to sort of focus their comments on specifically what the DCA needs in order to move the siting analysis and the design forward. A lot of these people are obviously have significant issues with the project, and they comment on the fact that they don't like the project, which I can appreciate. But we also need comments on the siting and where specific things are, and taking advantage of their local knowledge of the Delta to help us out. So we've trying to try to channel their comments in a way that are more helpful to us getting our job done and targeting more the purpose of this committee, which is helping us site the facilities and make sure that in our siting and our logistics around those sightings, take advantage of the knowledge that they all have as members of the Delta. And then, as I said before, we do keep a questions tracking log and issue the answers to each of those questions at each one of those meetings. I think we're up over 100 already from our first 5 meetings. And we'll continue this process throughout. We're also in the process of revamping our website, and we hope to make these questions and answers a searchable function within our upcoming website launch. As I said, we're meeting twice a month through March. In April, we are hoping to move to once a month, and we'll have gotten through all of the major facilities on the program through the end of March, which is the heavy lift. And then we can start taking deeper dives on some of the more specific issues that come out of their comments in the previous meetings. So with that, I'm glad to take any questions or clarifications for you.
Any questions for either Carrie or Catherine? Oscar? No? Ken?
Sure. Thanks for coming again. Nice to meet you. I think we're happy that the DCA's reached out to the people in the community, and we adopted the Conveyance, Storage, and Operations Amendment to the Delta Plan 2 years ago. So we spent a lot of time in crafting recommendations about, the need to deal with the community, because in a lot, we went through months of testimony and comments, and it was clear to us that, impacts during construction were a key issue. And so it's encouraging that, you're out there talking to the community. And I think we recognized, what we went through the same thing where it's, hey, tell us what you need to see if this were to go forward. So that's encouraging that you're having that dialogue, but we'd also encourage you to look at those recommendations, because it went beyond just kind of the stakeholder committee. It went to how are you going to have a plan to minimize impacts. We also encouraged, DWR at that point to engage with local governments there. And one of the things we heard, and I talked to several of the residents, is the conception, and it may be an interpretation of the EIR, that buildings were going to get destroyed and structures were going to get undermined and all that thing. So, working through those issues with the community, it seems like, that would be beneficial. And maybe as you develop the EIR, you'll be able to communicate that more clearly, because, my comment is California, we don't just destroy stuff, building public works. That's not, but, you guys are the ones that have to communicate that. So it's encouraging, but we did spend a lot of time, took a lot of testimony in developing those recommendations, and thought it would be very specific on how you work with the community, because it does go, and I speak from 30 plus years of experience on big projects, it does go from, you can have a stakeholder committee that can inform your EIR and move it forward, but that contact is throughout the project. And that was kind of the gist of some of our recommendations, is you have to keep that going throughout, it's a pretty long construction period, but even afterwards, you can't lose that contact with the community. So thanks for coming.
So I have a question on the questions you're getting. So could you give us an example of some of the questions about maybe the citing methodology, or what kind of questions are you receiving and how are you answering them?
I think right now, when you give the committee a map showing these different blocks of land, without them putting their eyes on it, it's difficult for them to comment. And I also think when you're commenting on a methodology of scoring, it's sort of an iterative process. Does this methodology kind of match my instinctual ranking when I go out there and see it? So what we really want to do is we're going to, after this last meeting, now that we've kind of for ourselves narrowed in on where we think shafts should go and where the drives are and where maintenance should be in between, we're going to give them a map book, and we're producing that right now, that overlays an aerial and shows all of these things. And they've asked for parcel names too, so that they have that, so that they can drive out and see exactly where they are. And then we're going to have a narrated bus tour with them and stop at all these locations so they can see them more clearly. I think they've struggled to provide comment based on the types of drawing material that we've been giving them, because it's, without your eyes on the site, it's just a piece of paper. So it's one of the things we've done to pivot to be more responsive to how they'd like to provide insight. And the next meeting, what we'll do is now that we've got sites laid out and we've got drive links, we know exactly the space needs and the traffic. We've, got a database that we use. So we know the truck traffic and the employee traffic, and we can start layering all of that in there and start painting a picture of the entire delta. So another thing they struggled with was, in these meetings, you go through each of these facilities sort of individually. We had a meeting dedicated to the intakes because they're complicated facilities, and then we moved on to the shafts and whatnot. But a lot of them want to see the whole picture in order to start commenting. So we're going to start painting that larger whole picture in the meetings, the upcoming meeting. So I think coupled with more holistic information on the project, more aerial mapping with the parcel numbers on it, and a bus tour is going to help them provide information in a more substantive way.
So I'm curious, your guidance documents to get the focused feedback, the individuals who say to you, we don't like this project and we don't want it built.
Right.
But I'm going to go ahead and give you this focused feedback.
Some of them will, some of them won't.
I see.
Right.
Okay.
I'm trying to make it clear to them what input I need, but at the same time, I'm trying not to constrain what it is that they
Right.
want to talk about.
Yeah.
I'm trying to strike that balance.
Yeah.
I think in the next couple of meetings, as we have the whole picture laid out on the maps with the aerials and the bus tour, then we're going to start really trying to force that input on specific sites and specific issues.
Has anyone asked you a question about, well, I don't know, the overlap of which stakeholders attend which meetings, the outreach on the NOP or the outreach on the design and construction? I'm guessing that there are folks who have attended both, and I'm wondering if anyone has asked you, how are these proposed sightings premature to the input on the NOP on the alignment? Or are they understanding that you have not made a decision on the alignment and this is preliminary work to discover where certain sightings, no matter what the alignment, might be workable?
So the way that we've explained that is that the NOP includes 2 corridors, and we are planning to study those, and that's the work that we've asked the DCA to begin. So saying we have these 2 corridors, the facilities can be anywhere within those corridors. It is a fairly wide area, so the DCA has some room to move things around based on feedback that they receive during these meetings. But the next step is to look at alternatives as well. And so that generates quite a bit of interest in all of the meetings that I'm going to, both the NOP scoping meetings as well as the stakeholder engagement committee meetings. But that is being handled through the CEQA process. So we're looking at alternatives based on feedback through the CEQA process. So we will get feedback under scoping, formulate alternatives that we want to consider further, and then ask the DCA to complete engineering work for those next.
Quick question. On the 2 alignments, these are not yet locally preferred. I mean, these are not, who suggested those 2?
So those are alternatives that DWR reached. And they're both options as part of the proposed project. So under CEQA, they're not considered alternatives. That is the proposed project for the purposes of feedback.
So all that has to come out of the whole scoping. It's not even yet there.
Right. So we want feedback on alternatives to consider in the EIR, and then we can pick any of those alternatives as part of our process.
Got it. Thank you.
And I was just going to say, any alternatives that come out of the scoping process beyond these 2 corridors, we will bring into our process.
And how many are you going to do?
Pardon?
How many alternatives?
Well, I think
Is there a limit of the number?
That's
I know
up to
because I do
us.
transit,
Yeah.
and in transit we do the same thing, but the limit it to 6 or,
We don't have a numerical limit. We're trying
Okay.
to identify alternatives that meet the project objectives and could reduce the environmental effects.
Okay.
So we're trying to not end up with 18, which I think was the number in the water fix document. But beyond that, we don't have a number.
Thank you.
Ken?
So the Stakeholder Engagement Committee, you're dealing with issues that is going to inform the draft DIR. So is that one of the, prior to, going out and getting official public comment, there's a connection between the two as you, figure out what it is you want to do and get to, because this is a project-specific EIR, and you're going to get into, is this a brand-new EIR, or you're just sort of moving away from water fix, but some of the technical studies that you use for water fix would...
Okay, so a couple of questions. Let me see if I answer them all. So this is a completely new process. The governor directed us to use work that has been done where applicable, so we're not blindly including anything. We're reevaluating whether things are appropriate and when it makes sense reusing material. So the next question, I think, is one that we've struggled with a bit within the SEC. Everyone has a little bit of a challenge understanding the difference between the design and construction elements that the DCA is asking for feedback on and the environmental process. So we wanted to be really clear that the comments that are made during the Stakeholder Engagement Committee are not part of CEQA scoping. If someone mentions something to me during a meeting, it's confusing because I am the environmental person and I am there, but that is not an official scoping comment, even if it is made during scoping. And that we want to be very, very clear about that, but then the question of where that line comes in gets a little difficult. So the way that we have explained it so far is that the Stakeholder Engagement Committee is a committee to the DCA board, and as such, they are limited to feedback on what the DCA is doing. And so at this point, the DCA's charge from DWR is to design the proposed project corridors based on our direction to try to reduce and avoid impacts associated with construction where possible. And so this is trying to reduce the effects to the local communities, but it's specifically tied to the design efforts. That is certainly material that we will use during CEQA. This is design work to support the environmental planning and permitting efforts. So there is an interconnection, but because it is a committee of the DCA board, it is very clearly limited to the work that the DCA is doing.
Which is designing the alternatives that you're going to analyze under CEQA so that the comments you get, if it's to lower the, if you have an alternative and they say, well, you come up with, I'm going to lower the profile of some of these structures, or I'm going to do this or that, that's going to wind up in the EIR, and that's sort of, the strength of involving the community. So you're analyzing alternatives that have already had some input, which is a great idea.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, ladies, for coming. Very, very helpful. I think it's particularly helpful that you're here and that you're here regularly, because I think the responsibility of this body with its covered actions and the early consultation process is essential. So I think having these conversations, the questions and the responses helps that process to the degree that it can. I appreciate, Catherine, your approach to how to solicit feedback on focused areas rather than kind of the broader, do you like the project or not? I think the notion that you're going to get negative feedback relative to the project is no surprise, but I think the charge of what the DCA is trying to do requires a focused conversation, and that sounds like that's what you're doing. I guess the only question I would ask is there a way to know whether or not the responses that you're receiving relative to the more focused areas are being utilized in any way that can be conveyed back to not only both the stakeholder group, but then the general public? Is there a way to do that, or how is that being measured? How do you take that feedback and turn it into value or determine whether or not it tipped the scales one way or another? I'm just curious, how do you measure that?
Yeah, to tell you the truth, I mean, to date, the comments have been less substantive in that way, like this site versus that site. I think we're going to get into that in the next probably 2 months. It's going to be much more specific. And all of that will be recorded and documented. And then as we actually select the sites that we put into the documents to feed into the process, you'll be able to, it'll be completely transparent how, whether those comments were accepted or not. It'll be right there on the paper.
Got it. Okay. Well, I think the presentation that you just provided in the last 15 minutes would be a value to the Delta Protection Commission. I think it's another agency that sort of lends itself to being sort of in the community on a regular basis, and I think an update like you provided just now would be a value. So
Yeah,
I would invite you to figure out a way, if there's an opportunity, to come to the March meeting and provide the information to date. So,
Well, we've
Both
seen them
users.
at our meetings. I'm glad to reciprocate.
fair enough. So then, actually going back to Carrie, so I guess I had a question, and you may not be able to answer it, but I think at the beginning of your presentation, you talked about the efforts being focused in part by the water resiliency portfolio, and I'm curious as to what aspect of the portfolio findings or the work are you referring to when you say the project is moving forward in the 3,000 to 7,000 CFS range as it relates to the portfolio?
So I don't think that I was referencing the portfolio specific to the range. Generally, the conveyance
Got it.
project is referenced as an action within the water resilience portfolio, and so we are being consistent with that piece.
Okay.
The capacity was not specific to the portfolio.
Okay, I was just following the logic in succession, and so I saw the 3 to 7, and then I saw consistency with the portfolio, so I assumed there was a connection more so than that. Okay. I guess the only thing I would offer is I had the opportunity to sit in at the scoping meetings in Clarksburg right on the heels of the meeting in Hood, and I suspect a lot of the comments were similar, but one of the things standing in the back of the room you may hear that you might not hear at the front of the room where you guys were, was as folks were leaving, I think the impression, once again, was that folks could come and comment on the totality of the project, when in fact, my sense is it's I don't know about but it's a more narrowed, focused interest in the comments. And I heard repeatedly as folks were leaving, they're not listening, they don't care, what a waste of my time. And I don't think that's the outcome you're looking for. I think you are looking for valuable, because I think there was a lot of really good comments. I think there were comments quite different than there were, say, 5 years ago when DWR was out doing something similar. So it would seem to me that having that more difficult conversation on the front end about what you're looking for might add value and actually reciprocate it in a way that provides you more of what you're looking for versus folks walking out saying, I'm one and done. The timing is perfect because we just talked about the public engagement process for this body, but it just seems like that might be something you might want to consider, because I think there were a lot of good comments, a lot of interested parties at that meeting. The place was packed. I was standing because there were no more chairs. But I would offer that as some feedback in my view from participating. So.
Okay, I agree that the comments that we heard were very helpful and will be really useful in preparing the document. So we do try to include something in the scoping presentation about the ideas of what we're looking for, which are primarily ideas to help scope the environmental analysis and the potential alternatives, including impact and litigation. And we've heard a lot on those topics. So I think that has been really helpful.
Well, to the extent that there can be feedback about what those comments entailed and how they're synthesized and whether or not they're going to be used in what fashion, I think would add value to the broader process, despite the fact that people are not going to like it, and I get it. In fact, I understand that sentiment quite well. So I think for purposes of what you're trying to accomplish, that there may be a value of having a more circular process that includes feedback about how the comments were used. So,
Thank you.
Anything else, council members? No? Well, thank you again for taking the time to be here, update us. We really appreciate it.
Welcome.
And thank you for all your hard, courageous work.
Thank you.
So, with that, are there any public comments? In the very back? Oops.
Or you can sit.
How much time do I have? 3 minutes?
Well, we don't have a
Yeah, I see.
crowd, so, well, let's start with 3 minutes.
Okay, good. My name is Matt Conover. I'm representing Reclamation District 1002 and John McCormick Ranches. That region is at the head of the bifurcated alternative corridors of the DCA's project, and just to the north of the McCormick-Williamson tract, co-owned by the Nature Conservancy and DWR.
Could you put it on, or could I see it? This helps to orient.
Mm-hmm.
Walnut Grove's
I see.
over here.
I see.
McCormick-Williamson tract is here. Sacramento's up here. Stone Lake is an area of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Cosumnes River has a refuge here. That floods, it's undammed. It's been prevented from having a dam.
Nobody's going to be able to hear except us. You might want
You could go back to mine. I just
Yeah.
wanted to get it hands-on.
It actually helps me to speak more effectively.
Public can't hear.
Oh, I'm
It's
sorry.
okay, it's all right. It's
You
okay.
can't see the map
Is it
either.
okay?
It's okay.
Oh, you can sit.
It's all right.
Geez, I'd sure like to be over there. I can speak louder for the.
You want to use one of these mics?
I think they're the ambient.
Oh, they have, oh, okay.
So Walnut Grove's here, Rio Vista's down there on the Sacramento River. Sac River goes down like that. San Joaquin comes out of the delta southward to Stockton and LA. The corridors are proposed to come from the intakes up by Hood, Clarksburg, across to south of Stone Lake, to the head of Snodgrass Slough. I live alongside that. Our property is north of McCormick-Williamson tract. There's a TV towers are right over the top of that. Twin Cities Road cuts across right there. And they're proposing those intakes to go across to a forebay and a launch shaft for the tunneling machine that will then go down to the Stockton area through one of two different corridors. And those are both leaving from just around our area. They're going to disrupt an area up here that's a square mile. This from that Snodgrass Slough across to I-5 is a square mile. Their project has tripled the number of shafts that were to be built and drilled down just in the last couple of weeks. So the iterative process and getting public feedback into the process is very important because it changes so often. There's going to now be 15 shafts drilled down there. One of them's going to go right over my house. That's why I'm kind of shaking in my voice right now. Both that forebay and the launch shaft will be within the Reclamation District 1002. Those bus tours will be important to have. We'd like to be involved in that, but we have a larger issue also with the Delta Stewardship Council. I've been going to meetings for 6 to 8 years. We were in on the first cycle and testified about that. DSC did its Delta levy investment strategy and recommended that this area, which they wanted to be a wetland, would get levee protection over the second tier set of projects proposed of private reclamation districts. They didn't get their funding in time before a big flood came through, and it broke their upstream levee and flooded, gave them their wetland they wanted.
But they had to drain it out the south end into this cross-delta channel between the Sacramento River and the McCallamy River, which flows, the Snodgrass Slough is part of that essentially, and that actually is fed by Morrison Creek way up above Elk Grove. So the combination of all those waters, we evacuated 3 times 3 years ago. But in 1986, there was a flood of McCallamy, which closed I-5 for months. That could happen again. The forecast is for greater variability and extremes under climate change. So they're going to have worse floods than that. Their intake shafts are going to be up there, so I testified to them. And by the way, I also went to the Interagency Ecological Program meetings and the Delta Science Conference and other meetings and testified on these things. So my point is that the breaking of those levees and the pumping out of that has been after they had asked for heavy riprap. There's heavy riprap going on now to protect the city of Sacramento from expected flooding that will be extended up there, because the Nature Conservancy proposed to this council at this Cosumnes Refuge several years ago, said they wanted to break down our levee to the north of their tract, which they wanted to be a wetland, and flood all the way up to Stone Lake, and actually to Delta Shores, which is now a big shopping retail center. That is why that levee up there is so heavily riprap right now, because the state continues. Right now, there are 2 bills in the state legislature that I just saw this morning that comes from the meeting that they held, asking this council to go to the governor and carry water for them to prevent liability for them for loss of life and property if their computer models were wrong and the flooding got worse. Then it became an active proposal to break down those levees and let seawater, which they're calling brackish or estuarine water, to create marsh all the way up to Stone Lake. I understand it from an ecological perspective because I've got a degree from UC Davis in wildlife ecology and a master's in environmental planning and an MBA from USC, so I understand Southern California's perspective and a law degree. And I'm worried about bills that you may have influence over regarding landowner liability, because these floods have already taken out facilities like bridges and other buildings and knocked them into bridges that had to be replaced downriver. And there's no money in the subventions program right now. And there's another bill here by Dodd that would pass a bond. It might be because they hope the bond will pass $5 billion for a whole bunch of things, including flood protection program. And maybe the subventions program hasn't gotten funding yet because they're hoping that it'll be funded through this bond. But I don't know that. So our past testimony has had problems becoming effectively integrated into the public involvement process. You ask for public input, but you should make sure that you get back to people, as he said, to show that it's been integrated. And going to all these different groups that I've been going to, you're going to have a hard time, any human mind, integrating all of that. The feedback by everyone involved in all these organizations has been excellent. The openness by Carrie and Catherine has been great. The professional products have been outstanding. But still going to have a water project through here. It's going to drain all the water out of the Sacramento River. There's all kinds of... Anyway, I'll cut it off and suggest that you people seriously look at the Stakeholder Engagement Committee's comments, because I've been to 5 of their meetings, maybe 3 or 4, but they're pretty intense. A lot of information comes at them. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Conover, for your comments. So our next council meeting will be March 26th at the Gene Harvey Center in Walnut Grove. If there are no further public comments.
Madam Chair, I just had a question. Actually, it occurred to me for my own edification, Ken offered a document earlier in the meeting, and I'm just wondering, did you have a date and a source for this document?
It came from the Water Reuse Association. I was going to try and email Jessica or give her a link to it to get a better version of it, but it's something I saw. The Water Reuse just released it in the last week or so.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, we'll get that source, and meeting is adjourned. Thank you.